Here's something that might surprise you. The chip that could rival Nvidia's dominance over the next 5 years isn't a processor at all. It's memory. Wall Street just woke up to an extraordinary possibility. Micron, an American memory maker you've probably never heard of, could follow Nvidia's exact playbook and become the next artificial intelligence bottleneck kingpin. And that fundamentally changes which companies will control the future of AI. Think about it this way. Nvidia rode a tsunami by being the only company making GPUs genuinely good enough for the AI revolution. Everyone building large language models, everyone training neural networks, they all had to buy from Nvidia. There was no alternative. Memory is about to become that exact same story. Here's why. As AI models explode in size, they become absolutely ravenous for memory bandwidth. A modern large language model running on a data center server needs to move terabytes of data every single second between the memory and the processor. If that pipeline isn't fast enough, everything bottlenecks. The GPU sits idle, waiting for data. Micron makes both DRAM, the ultra-fast working memory, and NAND flash, the long-term storage. Suddenly, they are the gatekeeper between Nvidia's chips and actually functional AI systems. Wall Street has noticed the opportunity. We are seeing analyst upgrades, stock surges, investment strategy changes. But here's where it gets interesting. Micron's path isn't a clean copy of Nvidia's. It's messier, riskier, and potentially far more profitable. Okay, so why is memory suddenly such a big deal? Because the entire architecture of AI is changing. 5 years ago, GPUs were the obvious bottleneck. You needed Nvidia hardware to train anything serious. But engineers have gotten clever. They've optimized software, they've spread training across multiple machines, and they've squeezed better performance out of chips. The new bottleneck is memory. Here's a concrete example. Training a 500 billion parameter language model requires moving roughly 1 petabyte of data. That's 1 million gigabytes between memory and the GPU every single second. 1 petabyte per second. If your memory bandwidth can't deliver that, the GPU sits there twiddling its thumbs while waiting for data to arrive. That's called memory-bound compute, and it's devastating to training speed. For inference, running an already trained model, the problem gets worse. When you're serving thousands of users asking a language model questions simultaneously, each query needs to access the model's weights from memory constantly. Slow memory means slow responses, which means unhappy users. This is where Micron enters as a potential Nvidia-level disruptor. They don't make GPUs, but they make the pipes that GPUs drink from. And right now, there's a shortage. When demand outpaces supply, prices go up and margins explode. Investors are connecting these dots. Let's talk about how Nvidia became a $1 trillion company, because Micron is betting on the same playbook. Nvidia didn't invent the GPU. GPUs existed for decades in gaming graphics cards. But in 2022, when ChatGPT launched and everyone realized you could train serious AI on GPUs, Nvidia was the only player with mature hardware, mature software, mature supply chains. Every lab building AI had to buy Nvidia H100 or H100 Tensor Core GPUs, no alternatives. Samsung made memory, but they weren't positioned as an AI memory company. Intel made processors, but their AI chips didn't compete. AMD made GPUs, but their software ecosystem was behind. Nvidia had a complete stack, and they owned the moment. The revenue explosion was staggering. In 2021, Nvidia made around $27 billion in revenue. By 2024, that had more than doubled to over $60 billion. Profit margins ballooned to over 50% because the demand was so intense that supply couldn't keep up. People called it a shortage, but honestly it was just scarcity premium. Nvidia could raise prices and customers paid because the alternative was nothing. Wall Street's thesis is that Micron is about to become that gatekeeper for a different layer of the stack. Instead of GPUs, they control memory, and the economics could be even more brutal. So what's Micron actually doing that's different from Samsung or SK Hynix? First, they're American. That matters geopolitically right now. The United States is investing heavily in domestic chip manufacturing. The CHIPS and Science Act pumped millions into American factories. Micron is getting that subsidy money. They're building new fabrication plants, new memory production lines, all here. Second, they've positioned themselves as the memory supplier for AI specifically. They're developing next-generation DRAM called HBM, high bandwidth memory, which is basically plumbing designed specifically for GPUs. It's wider, faster, and designed to be stacked vertically so you get enormous bandwidth in a tiny footprint. Nvidia's GPUs need this stuff to run fast. Samsung makes HBM2, but Micron is investing aggressively to capture market share. Third, and this is crucial, Micron has less overlapping business with Nvidia. Nvidia makes GPUs. Samsung makes memory, but Samsung also makes smartphones, displays, and competes in the consumer electronics market where Nvidia is basically irrelevant. Micron makes memory and storage. That's it. They are laser-focused. The market opportunity is enormous. If Micron captures even 30% of the HBM market for AI, and that market grows to $50 billion by 2028, Micron could be printing money. And here's what nobody's talking about. Memory is less capital-intensive to produce than GPUs. Now let's look at the competitive landscape. Micron isn't alone in memory, far from it. Samsung and SK Hynix are massive players with longer track records and deeper pockets. So why would Wall Street bet on Micron? Because dominance isn't about being the biggest, it's about being the best fit for the moment. Right now, there are three trends colliding. Number one, the United States wants to domesticate chip supply. Buying memory from a South Korean company worries regulators. Micron is American. Number two, HBM is exploding in demand, and Micron's technology roadmap is competitive with Samsung's. Number three, Micron's valuation is lower than Samsung's, so there's upside potential. Samsung is actually more profitable than Micron right now. Samsung made around $72 billion in revenue last year and invests in 10 different product lines: phones, televisions, appliances, memory, solid-state drives. That diversification is a strength if one market crashes, but it's also a weakness if all resources need to flow to the thing printing money. Micron is focused. They make memory and storage, nothing else. If memory becomes the treasure chest of AI, Micron benefits directly without fighting for internal resources. Plus, Micron is building new fabs with government subsidy money, so their capital expenditure is partially funded. Samsung is spending its own cash. It's not that Micron is better, it's that Micron is better positioned for this specific moment. Okay, here's why you should actually care about memory makers beating everyone to the next level. The cost of training and running large language models is skyrocketing, right? And one huge chunk of that cost is memory. If Micron becomes the choke point and they can raise prices like Nvidia did, AI becomes more expensive for everyone. But here's the interesting flip side. If Micron succeeds, memory becomes abundant, prices come down, and suddenly AI becomes cheaper to build. That sounds backwards, but it's because competition with Nvidia actually increases when you have an alternative choke point. Nvidia faced no competition for GPUs, so they could price however they wanted. If Micron floods the memory market, they create options. Companies can shop around, prices normalize. Think about it like airline routes. When one airline owns a route, they charge outrageous prices. The moment a second airline competes, both cut prices. Micron entering as a dominant memory supplier doesn't kill Nvidia, it just stops Nvidia from having total pricing power. There's also a geopolitical angle. The United States wants AI superiority without depending on South Korean memory makers. If Micron dominates, that's a total domestic supply chain win for America. It's not just about profit, it's about sovereignty. And here's where it gets complicated. If Micron succeeds too much, other countries will subsidize their own memory makers. China is pouring billions into memory competition, so this is the beginning of a long technology race. Let's get technical for a second. You need to understand memory bandwidth to grasp why Micron matters. Bandwidth is how much data you can push through a connection per second. Think of it like a highway. More lanes equals more cars per second. A modern AI server might have a GPU connected to memory through a connection that supports 800 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. That sounds enormous, but for massive language models, it's barely enough. Here's why: processing a single token, a single word or piece of a word, in a large language model requires reading billions of parameters from memory. Each parameter is typically 4 bytes, So that's 4 billion bytes of data per single token. At 800 gigabytes per second, processing just one token takes milliseconds. When you're running inference at scale, serving a million users, milliseconds add up. Latency matters. A few extra milliseconds per token, and suddenly a chatbot response takes seconds instead of being instant. Users hate that. This is where HBM comes in. High bandwidth memory can support over 3,000 gigabytes per second. That's 4 times faster than standard memory connections. Suddenly token processing becomes much snappier. Models run faster, users get faster responses. Micron's strategy is to make HBM cheaper and easier to manufacture than Samsung's. If they pull it off, every AI company optimizes for Micron memory. That's the Nvidia playbook. That's why Wall Street is excited. So here's what to watch for. Micron's success hinges on 3 things. First, can they actually manufacture HBM at scale and cheaper than Samsung? That's not theoretical, it requires flawless execution. Second, will the market actually adopt their memory for AI? Samsung isn't standing still. They'll compete hard. Third, can they scale fast enough to keep up with AI demand, which is doubling every year? If all 3 happen, Micron could genuinely rival Nvidia's dominance, not by making GPUs, by becoming the memory kingpin. And that would change the entire economics of AI. What this means for you, watch Micron's quarterly earnings reports. If they report exploding memory revenues and massive orders from major AI companies, that's your signal Wall Street's thesis is panning out. Their stock price will reflect that before most people realize what's happening. There's also a broader lesson here. Tech dominance isn't static. Nvidia felt untouchable in 2024. But the moment a new bottleneck emerged, memory instead of compute, the rules shifted. Today it's memory, tomorrow it might be something else. The company that controls the bottleneck controls the industry. For more deep dives into the companies reshaping artificial intelligence, follow for daily AI news updates. You're watching the future being built right now, and you're getting the inside story.